what I tell people is walking into some of these rooms of power, what I realize is everybody's doing a few things: pleasing, appeasing, proving, and adapting. Pleasing, appeasing, proving, and adapting. And it is knowing that if you ask for something, somebody's gonna ask you for something. And so I think networking is also not just thinking, I go in and I get something. But at some point you gotta give something back. Like there has to be an exchange.
100%.
And I think that like the exchange really is the piece that deepens things. So when people wonder, like, I got a connection and only one thing happened, right? Like I started it, but like then it fell off or faded out. And it's because a lot of times, like maybe there was a missing mutual piece to it that you didn't know. Nobody thinks twice about it, knowing that you're active participant in the relationship building, and it's not one sided.
Behind every mission, every movement, and every attempt to create change, there's a human story shaping how it all unfolds. This podcast is for those change makers who believe the work that they're doing in the world should actually make people's lives better. Each week, I'm sitting down with these change makers who are shaping impact in their industries and communities. And together, we're going to explore the moments, the questions, and the perspective shifts that changed how they lead, how they build relationships, and how they create meaningful change in our world. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives. Omi, thank you so much for joining Reframing Perspectives. I'm so excited to talk to you. We met just like a few months ago. I think it was in February, and I just loved hearing everything that you shared about your journey, about what you've built through the power of relationships and community, and the impact that you have made. It's been so powerful. And just seeing that tenacity, the resilience, and just that belief, it's truly admirable. And I'm so excited and so lucky to know you, and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into all the work and all that kind of stuff, like I want to actually get started with talking about, you had your first kid when you were 17. Is that right? And you spent a decade on public assistance as a single parent. And you've, said entrepreneurship in the beginning was a means to an end and a way to get a place where you had control over your own life and finances. What was life actually like in those years? What was it? What did that time teach you about what people actually need when the systems aren't built for them to show up?
I think it's interesting. It's an interesting question because I didn't grow up, I grew up very middle class. I grew up like middle of the middlest, most middle class out there, right? Two working class parents, boy, girl, house, dog, fence. Like I grew up very middle class. So, and growing up that way and then having a child, becoming a teen mom, having a child at 17, and then moving into like, how am I going to live life in a way that I had never lived it before, right? So like, I think that as a single mom, I only knew of having two parents. So I don't even know that I could fully identify what my kids are feeling and not having two parents, right? I had my second child when I was 21. And so I think it was a lot of hard work. It was just working hard. It was knowing that like if I work hard, I can achieve, right? So like while the story, part of that story is like becoming a teen mom, I didn't skip a beat. I went to college. I got a degree in computer science, which is like a really hard major at that time specifically. Now I think like there's so many more reasons and so more accessibility to computers that's a little different. I mean, I'm not even that old, but I mean, I'm just saying that like, circa 2000, 99, 2000, like we're still fairly early into.
Yeah, my nieces remind me all the time that I was born in the late 1900s
Yeah,
and
there you
that,
go.
yeah,
So we're
yeah, yeah,
still,
yeah.
I'm just going to college around then. And so it's like, okay, I don't think I saw, like, Facebook wasn't even there yet. You know what I'm saying? It was like, it didn't come to like the latter part of me being in college. So saying all that to say that, like, I got to keep it moving. It was turning on the light. I got to get this done. Like if and it turned into honestly a spirit of defiance in a way because I was like, nobody's gonna tell me that I can't make it. Like, you're not gonna tell me just that, every stat out there, if they say that kids or teen moms are not smart, my kid's gonna be smart. If they say that, teens who have kids don't graduate from high school or college, I'm gonna graduate from high school. If they say my kid's not gonna college, my kid's gonna go to college. Like it was just like bump that. You're not gonna tell me what I can be and what I can't be. And so it was a constant like work for that. I think what I realized though, from a systematic perspective, is that, one thing to being a woman of color, but then also that America itself is not built for people who are single with kids, right? Like if you're a single person with kids, that's not what it's built for. It's actually built is actually the systems that exist are meant for there to be two or more people,
Yeah, the
right?
tax code's written for married couples, like, it's
There
made
you go.
for
That
yeah.
that is what I realized. So then, later in my journey and in my speech at NASDAQ when we rang the closing bell was like, my story is an American story, right? It's not a black story. It's not a woman's story. It's not a poverty person in poverty story. It's the story of trying to make it in America and what people feel like the American dream might look like and the distance between like whatever boots you putting on the strap with. That like, what kind of boots you bootstrapping with? Like, everybody's boots are looking different, and I think there's people who we're telling to bootstrap that don't have boots, and I think like that, that dance of, like, who you can be, how you can be, I gotta give a lot of credit to my mom who was just like, "Nah, you're not gonna be a statistic, you're gonna make it." And then I adapted that and then went on my own path of like, I am gonna make it, and whatever make it looks like. Let's fast forward to, graduate from college, got a computer science degree, all these things. Things that I may not been able to do because I did have children was maybe certain levels of interning, right? That sort of relationship building in college that would get me to the jobs is maybe things I couldn't do because I had kids. I didn't
Right,
realize it at the time, but
right.
I'm thinking about like, oh, I can't just go away for a summer to go like do this internship.
Yeah, you had to get a little bit more creative with what can you do, knowing that you have these kids that you have to take care of, and that's where community steps in. That's where the relationship steps in, and that's where,
Absolutely.
and also, the fact that you share that, like, you grew up middle class and then essentially kind of dropped your like individually, right? Like your family's still there, but like you individually kind of came down to this position. But here's the thing, you know what life is like here because you grew up this way. And so even though you went, lower in socioeconomic class individually, you still had exposure to knowing that this is what life is like because I have been there. I am from that. And so to then have that mindset and that consciousness of exposure of like this is the opportunities that will get me to this, I can imagine that that also helps with not feeling in the dark, not feeling lost, not feeling unsure of what can I do at that moment.
It also helps with empathy because I actually,
Absolutely.
for a long time, was like, I don't understand. Like, that mom is on Section 8, like I'm on Section 8. Why can't she just boo boo? Why, like, I don't understand. Like, they got food stamps, like I got food. I had a bit of like maybe somewhat, I don't want to say like full resentment, but a lack of empathy for people that I felt like was in my exact same situation. And I share that because sometimes we're looking at I saw I was reading something where they were saying that your proximity to an issue sometimes makes you feel like you're an expert on the issue, even though like it's just proximity. You're actually not in the exact same situation as somebody else. And you're not even decently studied on somebody else, right? So I shared it because like I think I had a lack of empathy for people that I felt like were in my same situation. A friend of mine, she used to always be like, that's not fair. You can't say that because you had support. You had
Yeah.
parents that kept your kid while you went to college. You had friends that stepped in for you, that babysat for you. You had, but I think what it does reinforce in me is community. Like, what does
Yeah.
community mean? What does it mean to have those relationships? And what did it mean to sort of like when you didn't have them, build them? Because then after college, I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I didn't necessarily have those relationships all baked in. However, putting my kids in sports, keeping other people's kids, and then they kept my kids, like figuring ways that like through sport, building those relationships that became sort of my community and a community for my kids and being like, oh, that's one way. Like whatever my kids are involved in, I'm then involved in, and it creates community for both of us. How does that become a formula, right, for how we keep community around? And that has been a support for us throughout my years of raising them, right? And so I think like there are some mechanisms that kicked in of like, how do you create the family you need every time you move to a different place? And what does that look like? So networking is everything. In my book, Originate, Motivate, Innovate, 7 Steps of Building a $1 billion Network, I talk about this a lot where I'm talking about like, well, what is the perceived idea of family? What is the actual idea of family? What is the perceived version of community? What is the actual community? How do I build that for myself? and my own vision and my own dreams.
Wow. That right there, when you brought up the proximity to an experience and thinking you're an expert on that, I think that's so valid because, as entrepreneurs, as change makers, as people who are trying to make a difference and go off on their own and trying to do things, community matters so much. Community matters of making that difference. But here's the thing. For example, I was trained as a therapist. I did my master's. I was, former therapist. And my first job out after I graduated was moving to New York City and doing home-based counseling and therapy in the projects in East New York, in Brooklyn, in, Bed-Stuy, all those places. Now, here's a kid that grew up extremely sheltered in a South Asian family and super protected and middle class, but very, very protected. And now I'm finished my master's. I'm so excited. I got my job. I moved to New York and I'm so excited to wear like my heels and my cute office type dress and go in doing home based counseling in the projects. Day one,
Mm,
right? Here I am thinking that, look at me, like I've studied this, I've understood this, I'm here, I empathy is my thing. And yet, that proximity of being an expert in something and bring there is like, well, I didn't take cultural competency into consideration. I didn't take into consideration that, well, okay, maybe don't wear your heels in some of like the most like dangerous parts of the city. And, it just, so of course, day two, jeans, shirt, sneakers and went in, learned very quickly, obviously. But it's that piece of recognizing that regardless if you are a professional, regardless if you are in the position of, it still is your responsibility to actually take into context of what's happening around you. And that not everyone's story is going to be the same. That, in the same instance, right? Like I moved to New York, I'm working at this nonprofit. And when I was working at this nonprofit, the supervisor that I got was also from California. And so I was open about where I grew up. And even though I was middle class, my parents did everything to make sure that we grew up in a neighborhood in a space where we went to like one of the top high schools. So she knew that. And when it came to promotion, salary increase, all of it, I didn't get one because they thought that I was some rich kid who with a trust fund and was just doing this for the heck of it when actually I'm paying my own bills and I'm like
mm,
down to $5 like every 2 weeks. And thank God that they gave the subway card. Otherwise I'd be screwed. But they just looked at me from that bias. So it was like, here's me experiencing and creating assumptions on my end. And here's them creating assumptions
mm.
about me. And so we're receiving this on both sides of it. And in the middle of it, like, we're losing complete context of what actually matters.
I saw the same sort of thing in teaching computer science. So I was a take K through 12 educator, and I was teaching AP Computer Science at TC Williams High School. And I remember this is actually my first time. I've been teaching before that, maybe teaching maybe 2 or 3 years, but this is my first time ever teaching a class where there were no, like, Black kids, and I mean, there was 1 African male, 1 white little girl, and then everybody else is, like, either white or Hispanic men, right? So it was like a total like a really interesting dynamic. But they had also the school system historically had never had a Black woman teaching AP computer science. Never. I mean, I honestly, they won't let me track this, but I would dare say that in the whole AP computer science unit, maybe up until that time when I started teaching, there's probably never a Black woman teaching it at a school system level. Definitely not in Virginia, but they don't track it, so I can't claim it. But before that, a white male math teacher was teaching AP computer science. And so I think that even the students coming in had some bias as well. And I did too. Right. And I made a lot of assumptions about them. I think they made assumptions about me. Yeah, at first it was a lot of sort of challenging too. Like, oh, you forgot that thing. Or like, oh, did you look at that part? And then I was sort of making assumptions too. Where I'm like, well, y'all just got it. So why you care about, you know what I mean? And then over time, we learned each other like, oh, actually, wait a minute, I can learn from you. And I learned, oh, actually, I can learn from you. And I think that we can learn from each other point is probably the great equalizer. If we could like figure a way to get people to that, we probably could
Yeah.
solve a whole heck of a lot when it comes to some of the division that we are experiencing across different cultures and communities.
I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like, you moved and you ended up building a community with these families and the sports teams who are different than you, who grew up differently, but yet they're showing up for each other, because you have this like care about we want our kids to grow up safe, happy, and with good experiences. And so you're showing up for each other. But in that, to your point, it's that it's just basic curiosity, right? Like it's instead of being like, oh, okay, oh, how is she going to teach us this computer, coding class? How this computer science class? Instead of being like, huh, what got you so interested in computer science? What is it that why did you want to teach? What is it about being an educator? Like instead of just making those assumptions and deciding not to have that, but I think it's like we also have to create that safety for each other to be able to ask those questions, right? To be able to come in so that we're not just like canceling people left and right for them asking a question to get educated on something that they just aren't aware about. Like, or maybe they're trying to like actually learn so they can actually decide, like, wait a second, is the way I'm thinking valid or not? And if we meet them with judgment and we meet them with like, "Ugh, how could you ask me that question? All we're doing is having them run the other way, like, all right, never mind. I don't really want to cross that bridge.
And sometimes, even along with that, you don't realize, we hear people all the time like, I was the only woman in that room, or, I was the only person of color in that room. And I think in those moments, you're moving through whatever you're moving through, not realizing that you're blowing a door open for someone to perceive something new and could be systematic. Like after I left, a woman could see another woman came in and was an AP computer science teacher. And it's like there had not been any women in that school system teaching AP computer science, right? And so it's like, oh, now we should look for a woman, right? Or like now,
Right.
like
Yeah, you normalized it.
yeah, now it becomes like a thing that's like, "Oh, yeah, actually, a woman was in that role before. Oh, I should apply for." I think you weren't. I wasn't trying to do that. You know what I mean? But like at the end of the day, that's what happened, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it's just interesting to be thinking about how like perceptions shift and move. I remember somebody asked me, "Do you want to change how people think? Do you want to change how people act, or do you want to change how people think?"
Mm,
Because if you wanna change how people think, then you can, like, focus on being provocative. But if you wanna change how people act, then you need to be clear. And I thought,
smart.
"That's
Yeah.
really interesting," you know? I think, as an impact leader, I wanna do a little bit of both.
Mhm. Right. Because the thinking is obviously also going to influence then how they act.
And then sometimes you're like, "I don't care what you think, just act different." You know what I mean? I think this is what we saw during the whole, like, uprising after George Floyd's murder.
Mhm.
I'm not sure people were all the way 100% thinking different, but they were definitely acting different. And so
Absolutely.
and now we see where the thinking wasn't maybe different, but
It was a reaction.
the willingness to act different
Yeah.
was there. You know what I
And I
mean?
think it's that part about, yeah, when something like that happens and if you aren't acting different, if you aren't, then, that's something to also like take into consideration. Like, oh, wow, even that doesn't move you to
Mm.
see things from a different perspective. Like now we really got to get into like, what is it about that like identity or, the internal narrative that they're holding that they just don't want to let go of. But even to your point of like they were acting different, I think that we had a moment that could have been powerful, but unfortunately, again, humans are just so reactive that we don't think about how to do it in a more intentional way. But in those moments when people are acting differently, even if they're not thinking it, those actions that are different, if we were to actually be like, hey, look, like now that you're acting differently and you're showing that, what do you see as a change? How has that shifted your relationships? How's that shifted your community? How's that shifted you in the way that you now feel, the way that you show up for your neighbors, your family, all of these things. But I agree with you. I think acting can be just as powerful to flip the thinking if we're asking the right questions.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of does acting different become transformation, right? Does it
Right.
become systematic? Does it settle into a norm, right? I mean, we can use examples of that in like tech. So, okay, so Uber comes along, right? And now, maybe people who maybe couldn't hail a cab in New York or like you just were, it was your only option was to use a cab. And then you're like, okay, now I have not only do I have Uber that can pick me up anywhere I am, but I also can order me food wherever I am, right? And so it starts shifting human behavior. Same thing with like Amazon, right? It's like before Amazon, I don't know that any of us needed a package that quickly.
Yeah, it's so
Now,
true.
if it don't come in 2 days, I'm like, "What are we doing?" I don't understand. If it can't and over here in LA, 'cause, like, I came up here from DC area. Over here, things come, like, same day. You can go they be like, "Oh, okay, we'll get it to you between 10 and 3." I'm like, "Yo, it's 6 a.m. I'm ordering it." It's like, "No problem." It's the level of logistics is crazy out here. Same
Yeah.
thing with, like, a Fashion Nova. You can get it the next day. It's, like, really interesting to see that things move that fast, but then it creates this things are supposed to move that fast. It's
Yeah.
transformed the way that we think about delivery,
Well,
right?
how do you think that even that thinking about delivery, thinking about the convenience of things and how we now become impatient with the inconvenience of things, right? How that has also shifted the way that community expects each other to show up, right? And so to take that and think about your journey with community and your journey with the way that expectations have continuously shifted. One for the bar that you continue to set for yourself, and one for the one that you are seeing that, wow, I am not going to let my circumstance and my situation get in the way from me continuing to still move forward. But you were able to do that because of the support system that you had. And then even your chosen support system that you built in Charlotte. And what did all of that teach you when it comes to things like, for example, building, BGB and looking at the fact that you built fundraising from such a unique and creative way that most people don't even consider. And I just want I'm so curious to that moment. Like, take us to that moment where you decided that, all right, I'm in the position I'm in. You like you said, right? Whether it's bank loans, whether it's any personal loans you want to take out, and they see a single woman coming into and saying, I would like to take out a personal loan and I'm starting a business and all these things, they're going to be like, heck no, get out of here. And or you're going to have insane interest that is interest rates that someone else wouldn't get but because you're a single woman you will. And so I'm so curious to what influenced and inspired that community centered capital raising funding innovative idea that you came up with and that has truly impacted a lot of women's lives and the way that they've shown up as entrepreneurs.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, well, for sure, the idea that if nobody else will help you, your community will, right? Like that was literally it. I think, I probably have to take the story back to my grandma. So I grew up in North Carolina and I had so this communal thing is in me, not on me. Like, and I'll say that from a cultural standpoint of like, it's who I am. So I think that's another thing is like one, let's understand like what's been born and bred in you from like you growing up. Some of this stuff is not it at its core and you've seen it work. But one of the a really great example of me seeing it work is so Originate, Motivate, Innovate, 7 Steps for Building $1 Billion Network is actually my second book. The first book I do not talk about at all, but it's called All Women Are Stupid Sometimes. And it's about this situation where this woman has this love triangle and it's like super dramatic and it's like romance lit.
Mm.
And I don't talk about it because I feel like I'm such a better writer now. I'm like, if anybody finds it, I'm like, but I go to my grandma's super proud of me. She's like, "Oh my god, my granddaughter wrote a book." My uncle owns an auto shop. She like got books at the auto shop. She's like, "Buy this book." My granddaughter wrote it. Like at that level. And so there was a historical bookstore in Durham, North Carolina called the No Bookstore. And so she's like, "Look, go around there to the No Bookstore and tell the guy the owner, let's say his name is Ray. That's not his name, but let's say that what is his name. Tell Ray I said that you my granddaughter and you need to get your book in the store." And I'm like, "Grandma, that's not how it works. You don't just go to bookstore owners, especially not the No Bookstore. Like, and this guy's like, Black history, like great, the guy in the community, like well known. This is like a historic staple bookstore in the community." She like, "What I tell you to do, go around there, tell me you're my granddaughter, and you need to get your book in the store." And I'm like, "Okay, like if you say so." So slightly, I think I did it to appease her because I'm like, "This ain't how I work, Grandma. I need to do more." So I go to the bookstore and I am intimidated. Like he's in there, it's like, "Hey, how you doing?" Whatever, I walk in. I'm like, I can't go up here and be like, "My grandmama name is," and she said, and I'm like, I can't do that. So I'm looking around, I'm piddling around. I'm like looking at the books, acting like I might want to buy a book or whatever. And so finally he's like, "Oh, what you looking for?" And I'm like, "Well, my grandma name is Wilhelmina, and I wrote a book, and she told me to come around here, and tell you that I need to get my book in the store." And he went, "Oh, your grandma named Wilhelmina? Oh, yeah, okay, child, we go way back. Let me see what you got." And that's how my book got in the store.
Yeah.
And I said to myself in that moment, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to, that was my first layer of kind of like, if you know somebody in a way, I had other small examples, but like my grandmother didn't have no more than I think an eighth grade education. Right? Like she had kids young, I think when she was like 15, got married young because this is what they did back then, right? So we're not talking about someone deeply plugged into institutions. We're not talking about, somebody with deep levels of wealth, right?
Right.
We talking about pure, organic, I know your character levels of support. And that was a true example for me of like, well, who do you want to be in the world? And so, like I said, when it came to building BGV, it was if nobody else will help you, look to your left and your right, like your community will. So while we wait for systems to become more equitable, because will they? Hopefully, yes. There's lots of people working on creating more equitable systems and helping systems to become more equitable. To your point about the banks and the investors and all the things. But what we're gonna do in the meantime, we still gotta be in business. We still gotta feed our families. We still gotta bring income into our homes. And right now, in today's society, it's equally risky to have a job and own a business.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And, what you're talking about also is I just finished Emma Greed's book, Start With Yourself. And she actually talks about that. She goes, I understand all the things that are happening in the world and all the challenges and all of the inequity that's happening. But I'm not going to wait for those things to get solved, to get started. I'm going to just do it. I'm going to go out there and do what I got to do. And then as I build, it's like, what can I then leverage? Because now I have the power to do it, to change. And I think that that's really powerful because what you're really talking about is taking ownership over, I want to build something. And so just so everyone knows, BGV stands for Black Girl Ventures. And this is something Omi started. And it's so powerful because exactly that, what your grandmother just said and did. I mean, if we think about like what is networking, what is actually networking? Networking is literally not, it's not transactional. It's not meant to be transactional. It is two people who connect, who trust each other, who see the value in what they are, and they're like, I'm going to vet for you. I'm going to champion you. Oh, I see what you're trying to do. Like, I want to help you with this. Or, you know what? Like, I know you've got something I can get because it comes from, like you said, even for me, South Asian, that communal support. Like what, and human species, we're meant to be in communities. We're meant to live in a village together. We're meant to be people who are like, all right, Omi, you're going to do this. Payal, you're going to do this. Like Angela, you're going to do this because that's what our roles are. And we come in and we lean in and we support each other, and fundamentally believe this is that the more that every person actually leans in, the more through that byproduct, everyone benefits and gets. Because if we're all leaning in, then you also are going to receive just by that fact. So what you did with BGV was like, all right, fine, institutions, you're not going to see us, bank loans, you're not going to see us. Well, then I'm going to create my own. And like, again, just the ethos of who you are.
Thank you. And I think like, we were to get technical about networking, right? And like let's use computer networking, right? Like it's a plugging in. And once you're plugged in, everything's moving two ways. All right. So like there's a connection point. Once that connection point happens, everything is moving both ways. And so I think another piece, what I tell people is walking into some of these rooms of power, what I've realized is everybody's doing a few things: pleasing, appeasing, proving, and adapting. Pleasing, appeasing, proving, and adapting. And it is knowing that if you ask for something, somebody's gonna ask you for something. And so I think networking is also not just thinking I go in and I get something. But at some point you gotta give something back. Like there has to be an exchange.
100%.
And I think that like the exchange really is the piece that deepens things. So when people wonder, like, I got a connection and only one thing happened, right? Like I started it, but like then it fell off or faded out. And it's because a lot of times, like maybe there was a missing mutual piece to it that you didn't know. And just being prepared that, like, people definitely in philanthropy know this. It's like, if I ask you to give to my organ, so, someday you're gonna ask me to give to yours, and I just know that's the case.
Yeah.
And we just go into that and we do that, and that's just what it is, right? And no
Yeah.
harm, no foul, nobody thinks twice about it, knowing that you're active participant in the relationship building, and it's not one-sided.
And that's where, to go back to BGV and the very first pitch you had were 30 women in a room with marbles and a coffee mug. I want to understand, and I want the listeners to really understand that when you say that we as a community are going to come together because well, you want to build a business. Okay, we're here behind you. Let's do this. That's what BGV really is, right? It's like the venture that you built based off of community. So I'd love for you to share, like, what that experience was and what was that experience like for those women in those rooms pitching and, you know, relying on the community around them.
Yeah, in the beginning of BGV, you couldn't have told me that it was gonna become what it is, right? Like, I honestly was thinking I can try, like, the news came out, women are getting less capital, less venture capital than everybody else, and I'm like, "Let me try to do something about that," right? It's kinda crazy, it's like a super big problem, but I'm like, "Let me try." And I think that first event that you spoke about was a brunch. I cooked all the food myself. I charged a little bit of money at the door. We voted with marbles and coffee mugs. 4 people got up and pitched, and if you like their pitch, you put a marble in their coffee mug, and I gave the money that I got from the door back out to the person that won. And that was sort of my first, like, proof of concept that, like, the more we get together, the happier we'll be kinda thing where it's like, people were so inspired by being together. And I think now more than ever, we see that too. Even our current, like, events that we do, like, people wanna be together. People want in on what could be helpful to the communities that they're around and the things they care about. So it became like, hey, community fundraising in a sense, but then it became much more. It became like me creating a container for people to find each other, for people to find their next partner, find their next investor. A lot of the things that we do, like the cohorts that we've had in, years, 2 years ago, they're still meeting up with each other. They're still having partnerships. And it's because I think just creating the container that says these conditions are safe to operate in and we'll be here to support if you need us, right? Like, I would say that's what I got really great at. And it started from me in the arts community. Like, I've lived a lot of lives, by the way. But I was also doing performance poetry. And I saw how, before I started BGV, and I saw how easy it was to organize. So I started organizing events. And again, the togetherness of it all, that's something that is going to sustain you through any market, is the togetherness. Like, we want to team up on supporting a thing. We're going to do that. Who has a container for us to get together to do it within, right? It's accessible for you to, people out there, and even the work that you're working on, Payal, like, to create those containers because they're so necessary and they're really the thing that lasts throughout time. If you look throughout history, right? Like, I built BGV off the premise of the rent party, which was in the early 1900s. White landowners in Harlem raised the rent, and Black people got together and they threw parties in their homes. They charged for those parties, and they used the fees from those parties to pay their rent. That's the premise that I built the crowdfunding mechanism of BGV on. So, we just continue to figure out different ways to innovate.
And that's the thing that first of all, I love how you're just like, "Oh, we have this problem. All right, I'm gonna get to solving that." And
It's
I
kinda
mean,
crazy.
it's
I'm not
crazy,
gonna lie. It's
but the
kinda
thing is
crazy.
that that is like you are truly an entrepreneur. Like you are truly in it. Like you are that person who is never going to let your circumstance and situations define what is possible to create and cultivate with the people around you. Like you're not building for the sake of like, all right, how much money can I put in my bag? You're looking at it as like, how much money can we all put in our bags? And because we know how hard it is and you're just like not willing to accept that. And I think that that is honestly like the delulu part of an entrepreneur that you have to have that in the DNA. You have to. Like there's no way that I'm going to be able to build the Empathy Storyteller Salon, which is based off of relationship ethos. And to be honest, a lot of it based off of like what your relationship of your grandmother was with the bookstore owner, right? It's that people invest in people they like.
That's right.
People invest in
That's right.
like people invest in people they trust. If they don't trust you, I don't care what you're building, they're not going to put their money behind it because it's too
100%.
personal for them. So when people tell me, and this is the part with them agreed, I did not agree with, where she says that it's okay for business to be transactional. Yes, it is okay for business to be transactional in terms of like, this is what you're getting and this is the output of what you're getting. But I can guarantee that she or anyone else is not actually putting an investment in someone or something that they can't trust.
No, she's talked about it openly. You know what? Here's the thing I think about things like that. Businesses must transact.
Yes.
People relate. Right?
Mhm.
So, like, if we're talking about, like, exchange of cash, yeah, we're transacting, right? But nobody's transacting with something that they can't relate to. And
Yeah.
with the brand with her working on brands like, Good American or even being
Yeah.
close to the Kardashians or the Skims or whatever, like, they understand that you got to be able to relate, and the relation can be fantasy. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, the relation don't mean it is real time, authentic you today. It could be you could aspire to relate to. You can relate to the aspirational piece of it, right? And they get that deeply in their branding. So I think sometimes when like I always tell people, if somebody's talking to you about how to make $1 million, they're not telling you how they made $1 million. They're telling you what they learned and the like cream, the foam off the top
Yeah.
of it all. They're not actually going into like the depths of it. And sometimes like when you get to a certain point, you just kind of forget everything and you just
Yeah.
go and you stand at this sort of high, mighty mountaintop piece of it. And it's like, and this is why like sometimes I just take things that you get from like these celebrity personalities with a grain of salt because it's like, don't get me wrong, they got really great things they could teach you from where they've been. And you take all that, you go, okay, I'll take that. But at the same time, some of the framing can be a little bit off in some ways, and not just with her. Right? Like, I think this is just across the board.
Yeah,
It's
and
just
this
some of
is
the framing get
also
me off.
and I think that that framing can be off for guest celebrities. I think it can be off for anyone. Like any
True.
book that you're reading, anything you're taking in, you got to look at it from, okay, what is the perspective that this person has had? What has their journey been that has allowed them to get those things? What from it can I take? And what things what benefits did they have? What resources did they have that I don't? But what resources do I have that they didn't? Right? So like for example, I look at it this way. Right now, the growth in real in person in IRL experiences is just completely booming. It's a hot market. Everyone wants in, including me. And and I've been building this prior to even knowing any of the economics of it, right? But it's social clubs, membership clubs, there's everything. There's book clubs, there's dating clubs, there's music clubs, there's read by yourself in a club. Like there's all everything out there. But the way that someone is going to build like for example, my salon is specifically for the changemaker demographic. The way that one of my really good friends is building also a community for changemakers, completely different. Same mission, same interest, same like goals, but so different. Why? Because she is Chicago born and raised. Everything in her community, everything that she has built, it just oozes Chicago. While me, who's a third culture kid, grew up around the world and, came to the US and like when I was a little bit older, like like when I was like 10, 11, and then growing up here, but also being this misfit where it's like, I'm not Indian enough for my Indian cousins. I'm not American enough for like my American friends. I'm a mutt. I'm a global mutt. And so knowing that perspective, having gone to second grade in, Queens, New York is my welcome to America, in Tampa, Florida, and Edison, Jersey, going to third grade in Australia, going to fourth grade in California. Like all of these things influences the fact that the salon and what I'm building is for change makers, but I am so adamant that it needs to represent the globe. It needs to represent the world. It cannot be an American centered way of perspective. It cannot be America first. It has to be that we are a community. And I mean, if COVID wasn't the perfect example that how codependent we are on each other, how countries are codependent on each other, why is it that we have certain, we have NATO, we have all of these things because they know that we have to work with each other in order to keep the world stable. And so the same
Oh, the
idea.
gas prices. If that is not evidence enough, tell people, you know what I mean? Like, we are citizens of the world, and we have to start looking at
Absolutely.
ourselves that way for sure.
Yeah. And so I think that that's the part where it's like every every piece of advice that you're getting from anyone, even this conversation right here, someone whoever's listening to it, you got to take with it of like what you want to receive out of it, but also what applies to you in your way. You can't listen to the conversation that we're having right now and thinking that what I'm doing is wrong or what I'm doing is right because you have to see what is going to work for you and your community and your neighborhood. And I think that's why we need community organizers. We need people that are in the communities who get it and see it and feel it and then come back together together to collect and be like, all right, here's what we got to do. And I think that Omi, like what you're doing is that, like, you are that person who's like really presenting and saying that, all right, fine. If women are not being taken seriously, if women are not being looked at as, true business women, I mean, the stats and research have shown that businesses that are owned by women and led by women are significantly more profitable. And we're seeing right now, I think the stats shows that 6 times, what is it? For every business that's open, like 6 times that are being opened by Black women. And so the amount of women that are going into entrepreneurship and the amount of Black women that are going into entrepreneurship, but not being able to have that capital. And also, let's also be kind of real about this. Not everybody wants to raise VC money. Not
No,
everybody
and not
wants to
everyone
be.
that wants to sell or be in business forever. Or we were just talking about this the other day. Like some of us, it's funny because you see these, like I said, social media people, and they're like, "Oh, if you're doing this, you don't have a business. You're just self-employed." Look, I
You're just
don't
a
care.
hobby.
You know what I mean? I don't care if you self-employed. I don't care if you want to call it a business. Call it whatever you want to call it, as long as your household is fed. And I think that like we just gotta let go of some of this. What makes you prestigious? What makes you like cut it?
Yeah. This
Right?
obsession with
Like
status.
it is an obsession. It's obsession with status. It's obsession with validation. And when you get into business out the gate, you're in a race to validation, and nobody talks about that part. You're in a constant validation among customers, validation among investors, validation among the banks, validation. It's like it is overload, and you can end up so emotionally dysregulated, which is what
Yeah.
led me later in my journey to taking a sabbatical because I was
Yeah.
like, I didn't even realize the level of angst around fundraising and like capital and like running a team and like that I had. I'm like, wait a minute, I am tripping. Like I need to
Because we're
calm
so
down.
conditioned in the US specifically to you're weak if you have other people helping you. Your strength comes from being self-made, which by the way, I don't believe that self-made isn't like it's not even a thing. You didn't do everything yourself. You mean your parents cleaned your diapers, all right? Like you did not do everything. You did not do that yourself. So like everything is done in community. It's done with having mentors, it's done with your teachers, it's done with everything has gotten you to the point that you're at because there were people along the way who like championed you at some point. And so building through that conditioning of I got to make it. My source of success is how much money I have, what the status is that I have, how much is in my net worth, all of those things. And you've talked about your sabbatical, the burnout that you had, this needing to just completely, where you were just completely broken and needed deeply, deeply needed that rest as your restoration. And coming back from that sabbatical, recognizing and changing your relationship to success, changing your relationship to what does it mean to be a change maker? What does it mean to be a purpose driven founder? Where you can still run a successful company and you can still do things that are purpose aligned, but you're doing it not from this place of hurting yourself and root and stretching yourself to the point of like literally destroying your health, but you can do it from a place of healing.
Think so what's interesting about your saying and what came to me is I'm not sure you could be the best change maker until you've experienced your own change. You know what I mean? Like I think like a part of being a change maker is that I've heard somebody say this one time too. Like before you hire a life coach, you want to actually interview them about their own transformation. Like if they haven't gone through a transformation, how are they going to life coach you? And I think like I would say the same thing for change makers. If you're not going through your own like transformation yourself, then how are you doing the best for the change that you see can happen in the world? So I think that like, and at some point along that journey, going through that change and figuring out what that is for you and then coming out on the other side and saying like, well, what change do I want to make now? The relationship to success can be so toxic. And it can be so addictive, right? I've been winning awards since 2018 every year, right? And I'm at 2026 and I'm like, what if I don't win an award this year? What if I don't end up on a list of like the best whatevers? Like at this point, I'm kind of like, what? So what? Like I think
Yeah.
I had to let that go, and it's insatiable.
It really is. It's insatiable. It's fed to us in that way that if you're not on this, and that means like you haven't done something right. And you really have to strip yourself away from that and look at like, well, in 30 years, I mean, God, my nieces don't even know who Madonna is. They don't know who like some of these like icon, like we're like, oh my God, this is an icon. Yeah, well, guess what? In 50 years, it's gonna be another icon. And so what matters more is like, what was your life like? Like, who were the people that surrounded you? And to your point about like, how can you be a change maker if you're not creating change in your life? Like, wow, that is so powerful. I will say as a former therapist that one of the running jokes in therapy is that you are a psychologist or psychiatrist or a therapist because you're still working through all your own stuff. And then the minute you feel resolved with it, you actually lose interest in being a therapist or psychologist. And so, there's this
That's
piece of that.
interesting. That's so interesting because I've heard so many people go, that's why they got into it to solve whatever they
Yeah.
dealt with in their childhood. Like, I became this psychologist because when I was growing up, X thing happened. That's interesting. Hmm.
And I firmly do believe that for the most people who are very purpose driven and, are really committed to whatever career choice that they have, I do believe that a lot of our gift or our natural strengths that come to us are because of what we experienced. And so now we're out there trying to like resolve that, right?
Time out.
But
Okay.
but you having experienced what it's like to go from living a middle class life to having to then see what, when you don't have the finances and when you don't have the right opportunities, how that can make your life so much more difficult and what you then have to do. I mean, it sounds like you really found that purpose of gratitude with community and you saw the benefits of community in those moments. And that's like led you to doing so many things with your businesses that have led to like helping people see that, look, you don't have to do this alone. Like you don't have to fall for, those systems telling you that, building something by yourself is the way to go, or, trying to do everything, raise kids, go to school, have a job, like, do the dishes, like everything, clean the house. It has to be on your own. You can. And I think that that's something that I just see through your story is that you have experienced it and now you are just on this mission to helping people see the power of community and the power of just relationship with self and really feeling and understanding what your relationship with self is. So then you can lean into the community in a way that doesn't burn you out.
Yeah. I think when we think about our experiences, we sometimes think about like what happened to us versus like what happened within me. So in telling stories, they typically have a few different phases. One of them is like this happened to me, then is this is what's happening with me, and is this happened for me. So like part of the story when I used to talk about at least the origin story of BGV is that I was engaged to my youngest daughter's dad at the time. And, I went to him and I said, I want to start a business. And he was like, I don't think you should because we're trying to build a family. Like, it's too risky. I don't think you should do it. And when I started telling that story in the beginning of me, growing BGV and that type of thing, it was like, how dare him not believe in me? Right? It was like, like he told me I was crazy and I shouldn't. And it was like this, like, this happened to me, right? Like, oh my God, like he told me I shouldn't and I defied it and here I am, right? And then as I kept telling the story, because I mean, I've done hundreds of interviews, as I kept telling the story, I started shifting it to like my inspiration because of it, right? Like he thought this way, I thought this other way. I tried my way and it worked. That's what happened with me.
Yeah.
Right? Is that like I tried my way and it worked because when I bet on myself. Now instead of it becoming like here's what he did and he said and here's how I got through it, it became like here's what happens when I bet on myself. And then again in transitioning again, I don't even want to keep telling the story with him in it. Right?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
got to this point where I was like, yeah, he said that. Yeah, those things did happen. But what happened for me because I bet on myself and he became such a small part, even non-existent part of the story. His
Yeah.
disbelief in me was way less important because I went through that transition of like, this what happened to me, this what happened with me, but then this is what happened for me. And because of what happened for me is my ability to see what can happen for others. Right. So I think like in our storytelling around situations and how that works. And so even with community, right? Like I think people have sort of poo-pooed it over time. Oh, community. You know what I mean? And now it's like, oh no, we can't do it. Especially with like social media and all that. It's like, oh no, we gotta build community. And brands realize over time, like, oh no, we need now even with influencers, like, oh, we don't just need influencers, we need influencers that have like communities Like, and that's becoming a bigger thing because we realize everything is gonna come back to it's being communal. It's the purity of who we are as human beings being, we're communal, right?
Absolutely. I mean, our ancestors died if they decided to leave the village and go off on their own. There were higher chances than them dying because they didn't have a community with them, and the lion came and ate them. So it was we are by social being, and that's why I do believe, and I say this all the time, that the more we go into the AI world, the more we go into tech world, the more as humans we are going to step outside into the world of analog. And we're seeing that. We're seeing also
We're seeing it.
with the pendulum swinging from this hyper individualistic society that now, especially with inflation and the way things have become so incredibly expensive, I mean, every week I feel like I'm having a conversation with someone else who is talking about how they're either in the process of pooling together with their 10 other friends that they've known for 20 years and building a compound and everyone living on the compound together, or I'm talking to individuals. Like literally last week, I talked to this woman, she's in her 50s, and her partner are moving to Montana, and they like have bought this plot, and their friends their goal is in the next 2 to 3 years, all of their friends are actually moving, and they're all buying they bought this plot, and everyone's going to have their home on this plot together and grow old together. There's a higher rate of women who are single mothers who are moving in with other friends who are single mothers and raising their kids together in communes. Like there's in communal living, you see we are at the highest rate of having joint families with multi generations in a family right now that are living together. And so we're seeing that pendulum swing back because people are exhausted and they're tired, and they're, I think, waking up to this, like, this thing that was sold to us of build, let's strip you away from your community, build on your own, and then pay to have your community back.
My goodness. What you're saying there could open up a whole nother conversation because I think the same, like IP is going to be the same thing. Like we take your IP because you had no choice but to register for this platform, but then we're going to sell it back to you. Like I think we're seeing that too. So yeah, I feel like that's a big conversation around like what truly is going to be the thing that we own now. Like what does that look like? Yeah.
Yeah. Omi, it was so great to have you on. I mean, I feel like we touched barely 1% of the layer of who you are and what you've done. But I think that having this conversation around the power of relationship community and what you've done with it and how you've truly transformed impact through that has been brilliant, and what more people are leaning into and needing to do. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for being so inspiring and just being you. Like you're just amazing. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This was awesome.
If you're enjoying these episodes, I'd really love it if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. Your words help others discover that the stories and these episodes exist in the perspectives that we're exploring over here. And the more feedback we get from you through those reviews, the more we can make sure that we're creating meaningful episodes that you want to listen to. Thank you so much.